Here in the Northern Rockies, dark winter months are outlasted in basements, dens, and nooks where kindred souls gather together to share intel, swap fly patterns, and relive the memories from seasons past. This gathering spot, known locally as the February Room, is the inspiration for this podcast. No matter the season, the door is always open to those with a fly fishing story to tell. Brought to you by CD Fishing USA, the North American distributor for composite development fly rods and accessories. 40 years of Kiwi ingenuity and graphite technology, now available at cd-fishing.us or your local CD USA dealer. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And remember to go fishing. Here's your host, the Carnops, and this is the February Room.
You've just learned the most important aspect of fly fishing: humility. With this line, Ike, a fly shop owner and veteran, introduces Coulter, a Marine wounded in Afghanistan, to fly fishing. Without giving too much away, I'm honored to introduce our guest today to discuss the new feature film, Mending the Line. Stephen Camelio and Joshua Caldwell, welcome to the February Room.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm really excited to learn more about this film. You sent us a link, and I watched a good part of it. I didn't have a chance to finish it. I'm going to finish it as soon as we're done here. But as I was telling Stephen here before we started recording, I was kind of immediately kind of blown away with the production of the film, and a really impressive piece of cinematography. The opening scene, the way that it was shot, Laura and I were talking about that, and wow, this is really cool. It's like one continuous shot. But anyway, let's just kind of dive into this, guys, and tell me about this film.
So I'm the writer. I came up with the idea while I was living in Yellowstone National Park, and my dad at the time was battling cancer caused by Agent Orange exposure. He was in the Army in Vietnam, and so 30 years later, he was diagnosed with cancer, and he went through the whole VA system and was dealing with the after effects of being in war, which was something I'd never seen before. And at that time, I was writing for fly fishing magazines and fishing a lot, and had heard a little bit about the therapeutic aspects of fly fishing, mostly for breast cancer patients and people like that who were using it almost as physical therapy. But it was also showing that it had this capacity to help heal minds in emotional therapy. So I kind of took those two stories and put them into this one tale of a Marine who comes back from Afghanistan wounded, both emotionally and physically, and is sent to a VA hospital in Livingston, Montana. And there he meets, like you said, a Vietnam vet who teaches him how to fish. And it really, it's really his journey of overcoming trauma.
Wow, cool. So Stephen, when you started writing the script, how long ago was that?
Years ago. 8-10 years ago, the idea came to me, and I started hacking away at it, and over time it sort of distilled into what you saw on the screen.
Wow, and you live in Livingston now, correct?
Bozeman. I was down in the park and in Gardner, Montana when I was writing it, and then a few years ago we moved up to Bozeman, and that's where we ended up shooting part of it, and part of it in the Livingston Paradise Valley area.
Okay, cool. So you definitely had the location checked off the box as far as inspiration for fly fishing goes.
Yeah, I don't know. Josh can talk a little bit more about this, but I don't know if anyone's written a film where every location was an exact location, where I used to fish or I used to hang out, or the road I used to drive on, or the house I used to drive by. And when they came out to scout the film, I was like, oh, this is where we're going to shoot this. This is where we're going to shoot this. And I came to realize it's not always so easy to get every location that you think you're going to get, but a lot of them made it in there, and it's exciting to see sort of this authenticity of Montana, and these places that I was fishing come to life.
Well, Steve, to be fair, you did quite a bit of spot burning in the script, so I had to save you. I had to save you a little bit from giving away all your secrets.
Yeah, right.
Somebody's got to pre-fish all that stuff to make sure it's going to play. So, well, that's very cool. Yeah, that must be really rewarding to see all those years of location scouting come into play. Josh, how did you become involved in the film?
Yeah, so I kind of came to it more through typical Hollywood procedures. Steven, after he'd written the script, he got it to a couple producers. One of our producers, Kelly McKendry, and Scott McLeod. Basically, they came on board and they started going, okay, how do we put this thing into production, right? And so Kelly started reaching out to a lot of different producers that had shot movies in Montana. Montana has gotten a lot more production recently, but at the time there weren't a lot of movies shooting there. And so she reached out because my manager had produced a film that took place in Montana. And he informed her that it actually was not shot in Montana. They shot it in Canada, but he asked what the movie was. And she said it's about a Marine who returns to, a VA clinic, and he learns to fly fish. And my manager's a fly fisherman. He knows that I'm a fly fisherman. And he said, "Do you have a director yet?" She said, "No." And so he was like, "Well, I've got a director for you. Can I send him the script?" And so she said yes. She was open to it. And they sent me the script, and I read it, and I just was like, I got to find a way. I got to get to do this movie. Like, I can't let anyone else make this film. Steve had written a really beautiful script, that really hit me. And I knew that if it hit me, because I don't, I had not experienced loss in the way that Stephen had. I had not experienced trauma the way that, the main character had. But if that, despite all that, it was still hitting me, right? I knew that we had a real potentially great film on our hands. And so I made the pitch, and to Stephen and Kelly's and Scott's credit, they brought me on board.
And then tell me a little bit about the casting process, the cast, and talk a little about the cast in this film. It has an amazing cast. Some of my favorite actors in this, in fact, that you don't see, a lot. But I love Brian Cox, for instance, and always been a big Wes Studi fan too. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, look, every movie needs a cast, especially independent film, and that can be kind of really challenging nowadays because so much stuff is getting made, that it just really presents some challenges. But we had a really fantastic casting director, Neely Eisenstein, who was on board very early on, and we started saying, who can we get? Right? Steven had stars in his eyes, and really wanted to go after some very top level actors. He thought he could lure them in with the notion of fly fishing on screen. But, again, in independent film, you just sometimes, casting is often about the offers and the money, right? You got to get the script to them that has the message and the promise, but you got to get through the agent. And so, we basically, the challenge for us was really finding a cast that felt dynamic, that felt different, that helped supported, the budget that we had, and would just really work well creatively. And I believe it was actually one of the agencies who suggested Brian as an option. And of course, like, Succession was sort of just wrapping up season one. And I think all of us were like, oh, do you think Brian would do it? Like, because obviously I know Brian from all the films he's ever, he's made, and we're like, is he even gettable? Like, would he do this? And turns out that he was, and he was very enthusiastic about participating and playing this role, and he loved the story. And he doesn't often do these sort of smaller budget films, right? Like, I mean, he's got a
Yeah,
massive
he's
TV show, he does
Braveheart.
huge blockbusters. Yeah, exactly. Braveheart,
Braveheart, for God's
Troy.
sakes.
Yeah, I think,
Troy. Yeah.
The Bourne series, like, come on. But he just, again, I think that what you're going to hear over and over again as Steve and I talk about this film is just the level of um, interest and support and sort of love and the need to be a part of the project that came out of everybody involved, right? And I think that's a huge testament to Steve's writing and the script that he wrote, because we just, you know, Every actor we went to said yes. And so
Wow.
Brian's agency, because Brian got involved, we started saying, well, who else, who do you got? We're looking to fill these other roles. And they actually pitched us Sinqua. And I was not really familiar with his work. It had been mostly in TV. But I was sort of immediately taken with the performances that I saw him give. And he just, again, you sort of start out going, okay, we need a guy who looks like a Marine. Like he's got he's got to fit that bill, right? Like as much as we don't want to rely on like the physical attributes when you cast, it's like he's got to look like a guy who's like a lifer Marine. So like let's start there. And but he's got to be able to show a vulnerability, and be willing to go there. And that very quickly narrows the list of candidates that can fulfill those two sort of things. And Sinqua was definitely that. I mean, a fantastic actor. I saw the vulnerability that he played in so many of his other roles, and he sells it as a Marine. There's no question, right, in the movie that he's a guy who was born to be a Marine. And so I think that, that was important. And then also, looking at Perry was somebody that our casting director recommended. Again, I was unfamiliar with her, but she'd been for a number of seasons in a show called In the Dark, which was like one of the number one streaming shows on Netflix and CW. Very, very popular. I was not familiar with it, but what Neely told us was, well, she's also fly fished before. And I said, whoa, really? Because most of the actors you go to, they haven't, you know? And one of the things, the challenges, the inherent challenges in this movie is that unlike, say, like a river runs through it, we just did not have the budget in pre-production to have our actors on board for 2 months learning how to cast a fly rod. We had days or maybe a week. So anybody that had maybe even like a smidge of prior experience was definitely of interest to us. And Perry had a year before gone up to Montana and stayed at a cabin that was used for veterans to come up and fly fish and horseback ride and that kind of thing and be out in nature. And she had gone up there unrelated to anything with the movie or anything like that. And she just had fly fished and really liked it. And yeah, and so obviously then she became like a huge fan of it in the making of our movie and really got into it. Um, and then like guys like, and then like Wes was somebody who years ago when the movie Soul came out, the Pixar movie, I remember I wasn't aware of this, but he was one of the like counselors, right? Up in not heaven, but up in the other world. And I remember a reviewer going, movies need more Wes Studi.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah, they do, like, he's so good." Like, obviously, I'm a huge fan of his from Heat and Last of the Mohicans and Hostiles, and, like, I mean, he's just a fantastic actor, and I just said, "What about Wes? Like, do you think we can get him?" And, again, to Wes's credit, being a veteran himself, and he's very involved in sort of the, like the horse therapy, the equine therapy for veterans. I believe he volunteers for an organization in New Mexico that does that. So he wasn't fishing, but the notion of sort of these therapeutic pursuits for people who are experiencing PTSD, I believe, really spoke to him. And again, came out and made the movie, right? Like it was so cool. And Patricia as well. Patricia is very much sort of a supporter of veterans, not that nobody else isn't, but she really gravitated towards the film and really wanted to be a part of it. So we just found that along the way in all these important roles, we just found people that really, really wanted to be a part of it. And I think on any journey you go on, you want to be on a journey with the people that want to be there with you. It doesn't matter how much star power they have, how big of a name they are. If they're not really on board with what you're doing, like it's almost pointless.
Stephen, when you write a script, you have in your head, obviously, um, you have ideas and visions of who's going to play these characters. Um, did you have any sort of notions or ideas of who you might try to get for these roles, or is that not something that a writer does? It seems to me like you would kind of have I don't know, an ideal cast in your head, maybe, or just some characters that you think of that, like, oh yeah, maybe these three people might be a good option for this character, or
A little bit, but you make up these characters and they sort of become your own, almost mine singularly for a long time. And so when you start to say, a specific actor, you say, oh, but he doesn't have this part that I was looking for that, or, he's about 90%, but where's that other 10%? And you just want everything to be so perfect. And of course, there are, that I did know of some, as Josh noted, some fly fishermen who were actors who I thought I just we needed, because we needed the person to fly fish. But as I learned later on, and as we started to get into production, like these people are incredible professionals. They are able to sort of pick up anything almost at the drop of a hat, and even if they're not an expert, they can make themselves look an expert, or they can make themselves look like a beginner. And and now when I look at the film, there is no other Ike other than Brian Cox. There is no other Coulter other than Sinqua. There's no other Lucy other than Perry. They really embodied the roles in sort of the spirit of each of them to such a degree that it didn't matter what I think about, or who I was thinking about before. They've become those roles, and I'm forever in debt for the passion and skill that they put into it.
Cool. And were you on location for a portion of this? And did you have an opportunity to instruct at all in the fly fishing aspect of it?
I was on set every day. I'm a producer on the film. So I was pretty much on set every day. I was in the water with a net when we were doing fishing scenes. I was driving around grabbing waders for people who never wore them before, our crew that needed to be in the water. So I got to do all sorts of crazy stuff. And I did not do any fishing. And so I worked with Sinqua a little bit, and I got to go fishing a little bit with Perry. But we had a guy named Simon Gosworth. I'm not sure if you're familiar. He's one of the best casters in the world, and he is Farbank, Sage and Rio and all those brands, their parent company. He's their director of education, and he goes around the world and teaches people how to spay cast and how to trout fish and all this stuff. So they were gracious enough to give him to us for the shoot, and he worked with all our actors. He taught Brian how to cast with a bamboo rod. He told them how to hold a rod even if they weren't fishing. He got them to cast. He got them to wade in the water without falling down. So we owe a lot of the authenticity to Simon. And of course, Josh was directing every scene. And as a passionate fly fisherman, he knew the importance of getting everything right, and made sure, that all of that was nailed down.
Yeah, it was really up to Steve and I to kind of produce the fly fishing elements of this film, because our other producers, we either had other stuff going on, or it's just not a world they are familiar with. So, and by me and Steve, I mean Steve. Um, I really put it on him. I was like, Steve, like you got to take over any of the fly fishing stuff in terms of producing it, because, and what I mean by that was like, Steve early on had the connection to Farbank, which allowed them to come on and effectively become our tackle partner. I mean, they provided all the rods and reels in the film. They provided all the tackle. They provided Simon, who, in addition to teaching everyone, like Steve said, he was also on set rigging up all the rods and making sure that, like, because I'm looking at performance, and so I've got Simon over my shoulder looking at the cast, right? To like mean literally like the fly cast, not the cast
Yeah,
cast, but
right,
like
right.
I've got him watching that, Steven watching it, and so I just think, like, again, to what Steven said, which is, it's so important we got all that right, or at least as close as possible within the limitations we have. But Steve and I really put on Steven to sort of help produce and bring together a lot of the elements that we needed to make a movie that features fly fishing, because just one of the a simple example is the fact that, like, when you go out, when you see Tom Rosenbauer's Orvis fly fishing lessons, or you see any of these guys, any of the fly fishing film festival movies, like, those are all documentaries. So, like, that's a camera crew, or that's just rolling hours and hours and hours of footage, right, and then cutting it down into 3 minutes. And so it looks like it's just like fish after fish after fish. You're hooking in. It's great. We cannot do that on a movie. because we do not have hours and hours and hours and hours waiting for a fish to appear and hope that our cast can actually catch one, right? So all of that has to be faked essentially and produced, much like it was on River Runs Through It. And one of the inherent challenges of making a film like this is that when you want to do like our opening scene with explosions and all that kind of stuff, there are like a long list of people you can call to take care of that. But if you want to do fly fishing, that list is two people, and we hope they're still around doing it, right? Because like it just doesn't happen very often. And so, through Steve, we got connected with, again, with Farbank, with Simon, with Sims, with Tom Morgan Rodsmiths, who built all the bamboo rods for the film. Um, and also like got us connected to a gentleman named Joe Urbani, who is a fisheries biologist. He builds trout ponds across the country. He also like sort of rehabilitates streams. But the other thing he does is he's known for is he was the guy on A River Runs Through It who got the fish. Like he provided the actual fish on that film. And so we reached out to him. He's still based in Bozeman. And we said, hey, we're making a movie. Like, we know you did this for River Runs Through It. Would you come do it for our movie? And he said yes. And so, all those fish are wild fish, I believe, except for the cutthroats, right, Steve? Or the
Yeah, no, I
cutthroat,
believe
the
the
cutthroats and the
Yellowstone
whitefish.
cutthroats were what?
Oh,
The
well, wild.
Yellowstone.
I know the whitefish were hatchery fish, right? Yeah, I think we got those, which was fine. But I think every other fish in the movie is a wild caught fish. And so, so again, like, I mean, when we first met with Joe, I said, so Joe, like, when River Runs Through It, I'm not saying you did this, but those fish were dead when you saw them on camera, right? So that could have been grocery store fish for all I know. It doesn't matter. But we need to see a live fish because now we're doing catch and release, right? And so I said, how are you going to get the fish? And he said, well, each morning before you guys are shooting, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go out and I'm going to catch the fish for you. And I was like, Joe, I would not want that job because I've fished and I would never want that amount of pressure on me. So good luck to you. And when the movie's done, I would like to go fishing with you because apparently you know where to go to get fish that you're going to guarantee to catch, are guaranteed to catch. So let's go do that when we're all done here. And true to form, like he showed up and he caught those fish that were in that film.
Wow, that's really cool. And yeah, definitely something that you notice as an angler that they're indeed wild fish, right?
Yeah, Joe has said, I don't know. He always used to tell me, I don't know if this movie's going to be any good or not, but you're going to have better looking fish than they did in The River Runs Through It.
That's a fact. That is a fact. Yep, no doubt. And Road Drift Boats was also helped you out with the film, right? What did they provide some boats for you? And
Yeah, they brought out, so there's a fishing scene with Brian and Wes where they're rowing down the Yellowstone River, and again, to be differentiate ourselves a little bit from River Runs Through It, we wanted to have that drift boat scene. Everybody who lives in the West knows, most people fish from a drift boat, or a lot of people do, and we wanted that authenticity and that scene in the film. Yeah, so we called them up and basically said, would you bring down a boat for the day? And they put it in the water and got in the spot, and then let us use it all day, and then took it away. So it was just the passion and the kindness of the fly fishing community that supported this film. I mean, Josh has already mentioned the other partners, but basically we couldn't have made it without their support. So
yeah, we also had all the nets in the film were hand built by this guy named Mike Craig, who runs No Leaf Clover Nets. And, again, looking at just stuff, we have an opportunity here. Let's do something cool, right? We could have just used an aluminum net or one of those standard wood nets that everybody has. But I was like, I own some of Mike's nets, and I was just like, these things are so cool. Like, why don't we put these in there, right? Like, and again, like he shipped them out to us. We put them in the film. We shipped them back. Like, it's that kind of stuff, and the way that even like, I mean, Tom Morgan, like they hand built 2 bamboo rods purely for the film. And that level of sort of authenticity that, like Steven said, and the detail, like that's what we were always aiming for, right? We wanted to really say, okay, like let's do this right, and let's give anglers watching this something to, like, look out for, some Easter eggs in there.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what again, just a perfect location to do it. You've got all these major companies that are based in the Bozeman, Livingston area too. So that's cool that they all rallied and got behind your project.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we could have done it regardless. Like, we could have put these guys in Sims waiters, and without Sims permission. But it would have cost us. We would have had to go and buy them, right? And we all know that Sims waiters are amazing, but not cheap things that you could get like
Worth every penny, man. I got a
yeah, worth
pair that
every
are
penny, but
I got
they
a
are
pair
not.
that are at least 10 years old that still don't leak. It doesn't even
y-
make any sense. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't know how many days I have in them.
I mean, put it this way, not conducive to a, an independent film, right? Budget. But they came out but they were, they gave us these waiters to use, and you see it, and that's what we really wanted, right? It could have been basic no name waiters. We could have just gotten blank rods, like whatever that is. But I think when you see that we're using like legit stuff and really good quality equipment and tackle and clothing, it takes it to another level, and we had an opportunity here. River runs through it. Those guys are in their wool pants and, the rods are all hand built. Like, they're not paying attention to that stuff. But now the sort of the world of fly fishing has changed, and so featuring, some of these really great companies and then providing us with all this stuff, it would have been a much more expensive film, or we would have had to limit ourselves in some way, you know, um, if we hadn't had that level of support.
Yeah, and another one was Anglers West Fly Shop down in Immigrant, Montana. Gave us their shop for the day, and really, again, that authenticity of having have them in a real shop, not something that, we
We
had to sort
built
of
or was a stage or something like that.
exactly. And they also, when I said, they were the ones who gave us the waiters for the crew. I need 5 more waiters. Like, I ran down to the shop, and they're like, go in the back and grab what you need and bring them back when you're done. So I mean, just such support was amazing.
Oh, that's cool. That was Anglers West. I wondered what fly shop that was. Cool. And then what role did Warriors in Quiet Waters have in this film? We've had them on this podcast before, and we learned a lot about the benefits of fly fishing, fly tying, rod building, um, really from, like a deep physiological aspect too, within the mind of wounded veterans.
Yeah, so I'll sort of talk about the pre-production part of it, and then Josh can see how they influence the film and their involvement there. So yeah, living in Bozeman here, I wasn't too familiar with them until my daughter went to a little Montessori school, and I saw a guy who has 2 magic legs. He's double amputee from the knee down, and he had a big WQW sticker on his truck. And I said, I got to find out what this organization is, and came to realize they take post 9/11 combat vets fly fishing, as you said, for therapy and both physical and mental aspect of that. And so, yeah, I met this guy named Saul Martinez. I told him about the script, and he said that we should talk. And I sent it over to them, and they obviously really responded to the story, which is basically in line with the story of all the warriors who come to fish at their ranch. And as we sort of started to move along, they just became sort of a partner for us, advisory, and later on in production, which Josh can sort of talk about. We went fishing with them, and how that influenced the story.
Yeah, I mean, we and Steven would agree with me here. When we set out to make this movie, the story that we're telling here, it's so important that we get this film right. That was my main concern, was how do we get this right? Not only how do we get the fly fishing right so that we get, we don't get chewed out by anglers, but how do we get the portrayal of the military correct? How do we get the portrayal of the VA correct? How do we get the portrayal of PTSD correct? Right? Because like when you talk to these guys, meaning like, veterans and even active duty, they're like, I can't watch movies about military guys. It's also fake. It's like, it's not real. They don't get it right, and so it makes you really go, okay, how do I get it right? That's my challenge, but the thing to me at the end of the day is, because this movie is about, you know, the trauma of war, the trauma of loss, it's there, we need to portray that correctly. It's so important to get it right so that it helps at the end of the day, and is not something that's easily dismissed. To say, oh, they didn't get that right, I'm not going to pay attention to it. And really, the way to get it right is by going out into the world and talking to the people that are living this. And so, like Steve said, I came out in, we shot it in August of 2021. So I came out in May 2021. Surprisingly, I'd never been to Montana before. So that's also the reason I wanted to do the movie. But, had never been to Montana. So I came out and it's like, well, let's see what this is like. Let's scout. We got to go location scouting. So we spent several days location scouting. And then one day, Steven and I had the chance to go out on an FX with the group. And for those that don't know, an FX is like a fishing experience. And so we were on Depews. And of course, I'd never fished Depews either, but we were out there and we got to talk to a couple of guys that were like team leaders, right? We didn't really, some of these guys come out, they don't want to talk. It's not a public thing. They want to come out and fish, and we wanted to respect that privacy. But at the same time, we did want to get some feedback. We wanted to sort of talk to people. So we ended up talking to these two guys who were like team leaders. I think that, I don't know if that's the actual term, but they're not really fishing, but they're there for the other guys that have come out. They've been through the program before, and they're there to sort of help support in whatever way they want. But we really got to talking to these guys, and we realized that one of them had a very, very similar story to what Stephen wrote. He was injured. He went through the VA system, and then he eventually got out. And this is a little inside baseball. One of the struggles Steven and I had when we were crafting the story, maybe it was more me, but was in the original draft of the script, Coulter is injured and he's out of the military, and he's at the VA kind of as a halfway house situation, which that is a negative connotation, but like, he's about to transition out, and he knows he's transitioning out, like he's done, military over. And the struggle was just why does a guy like that, why would a guy like that accept the idea of going fly fishing? Right. I was struggling with it. But we were sort of like, well, yeah, when you get injured, you're done. Like, you're not in the military anymore. And as we got to talking to this vet, he was like, oh, like I was injured, and I was going through sort of the warrior transition unit. And I said, oh, what's that? And he's like, oh, well, it's like kind of, you go through this series of tests and this series of process to sort of, they determine whether you're going to go back in or you're going to stay out. I was like, oh, wait, hang on. Like, if you get injured, you can go back in. He said, yeah. But he was telling us about how his experience was, he really rehabilitated himself physically, but he did not rehabilitate himself mentally. Right. He was still very much suffering from the experience of trauma and the PTSD. And he ended up transitioning out. Right. But I thought, oh, if that's not a decision that's made immediately, that gives Coulter sort of motivation to do, because Coulter wants to stay in. Right. So if you have a character who he would like to be in the Marines for life, right, and he gets injured and is out, I don't know why he would go fishing. I don't know why you would do anything, right? And I think that's what you're seeing, in a lot of cases, like the challenge of how to help these guys when their entire image of themselves is around the military, and now that's been ripped away from them, right? But in our story, we needed because we're making a movie, right? You got to have this narrative forward momentum and motivation and arcs and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things about Coulter was, if he believes that it's possible for him to get back in, with some naivete, right? Like, he thinks he can get back in when everyone around him sees it's not, and the audience sees it's not, but he believes he can. He might be willing to go do whatever it took. But by going and doing whatever it took, i.e. fly fishing, he's now opened himself to the possibility of overcoming that trauma, right? When that wasn't his goal. And so anyway, so that was like something that came out of a conversation we had with these guys standing next to, the Spring Creek at Depews. And it just totally informed how we then sort of went back in and developed out this story, so that it felt like Coulter was, what it became was, what am I really aiming for? What am I pursuing anymore? Right. And if he's pursuing fly fishing as a way to get back in, but then that gets ripped out, well, then that becomes your sort of, dark night of the soul period in the film. As much as we're telling sort of a story based in reality, you still got to adhere to some dramatic elements, right, that make movies. It's not a documentary. But as long as we sort of hit the emotional truth of this story, which Steve had already really set up in his original script. That's what we aim for. And then we wanted to sort of allow that to exist on a bed of accuracy and authenticity.
Wow, that's cool. So that was actually kind of an adjustment in the storyline that came about just from meeting and fishing with these actual vets.
Yeah, because you want to know what's this like? I don't know what it's like. I've never been in the military. Like I don't have that experience. And so to get it right, you got to make sure we wanted to really talk to everybody we could. I know that we ended up talking to the VA. They read the script and provided us some really great feedback. And of course, one of the challenges in the movie is while there's no real bad guy in the film, I mean, Coulter's kind of his own worst enemy, so to speak. We kind of had to thread a very fine line with the VA. We needed the VA to sort of be not a bad guy or an antagonist, but they couldn't be the perfect help, right?
Right.
There had to
Yeah,
be
that's
some.
that's delicate for sure.
Yeah, we didn't wanna insult the work that they were doing, but we also kinda needed that work to not work for Coulter, right? And we sort of threaded that needle, like, so example, in the group therapy scene, which, features Saul, who Stephen had mentioned before, he says, "This group has helped me enormously." Right? So, like, there is evidence that, like, that kind of therapy, that kind of approach does work for some people. In our movie's case, it just does not work for Coulter. He's not ready yet. And so that's how we kind of threaded that needle and make sure we release accurate, but that it was something based in our character's response to it, not like the VA is cold and callous and doesn't care about the people. And I think that's emblematic of Dr. Burke and how she approaches both Ike and Coulter, and sort of again going out of her way to say, look, I know the things that we're offering you might not work. Have you ever thought about fly fishing? Right? Fly fishing is not some sanctioned activity. At least I could be wrong, but I believe it's a part of, VA's therapy, at least officially. And so I think, like, again, finding ways to sort of create obstacles and create barriers for our character, but do it in a way that felt accurate and authentic to the story that we were telling. Another really great thing that came out of just talking to guys was I sort of immediately started reaching out and connecting with sort of veterans who had gotten into fly fishing because I wanted to understand a very personal perspective, of why did they do it, what it meant to them. And there was one guy in particular. He was a Marine. He'd experienced a pretty severe trauma, although it wasn't related to combat. It was related to something else. But he still was a vet and had that experience. And he was the one who told me he was sitting on the banks with a guy who was like an older guy, similar to Ike, and he basically told him, he's like, he tells him the line at towards, not I'm giving not that Ike tells Coulter, which is, all a soldier always believes that the military, it's his whole story, you know, but it's not. It's just a chapter, right? It's not the whole story. And hearing that, I was like, my God, that's got to go in the script, you know. That just sums up the whole thing, and that was something that came to us through research. And so, again, when you're making a movie like this, being able to talk to the real guys, have conversations with them, understand their point of view, you never know what they're gonna say that might really significantly inform the story that you're telling in a way that just makes it that much more, um, gives it that much more potential to connect with that audience.
Right. And, what a cool opportunity for this film to kind of become like the catalyst for some wounded veterans to explore fly fishing as a possible, means to recovery. That's really profound.
Yeah, and it might be fly fishing, right? We had a lot of people we'd give the script to, especially once we got into doing a lot of the work with the military and Department of Defense, which we can talk about in a minute. But like, there were guys who said, "Yeah, I read the script. Like, I've never fly fished before. I don't know what that's like, but I totally understand the movie because I surf." And to me, surfing
Yeah.
is the fly fishing in the film. Or another guy said, I do woodworking, and the woodworking to me is the fly fishing in the film. And so I think, despite the fact that it's a movie that is very much about fly fishing and the ethos of fly fishing and the spirituality of fly fishing, um, you don't have to fly fish to connect to the film, especially if you're a veteran. It might be horses, taking care of horses. It might be group, it might be fly fishing. It might be regular fishing. It might be deep sea fishing. It might be, like I said, woodworking. It might be surfing, right? Like you still have the ability to watch this movie and connect to it because it's speaking to a greater idea of trauma and how we overcome it and how we heal. The mechanism by which we do that is less important than the possibility of it.
Yeah, great point. What was the Department of Defense's role in this film, and how did that come to pass?
One of our producers, Kelly McKendry, who is an Army brat herself, reached out to the Marine Corps. It was written as a Marine, so she reached out to the Marine Corps and just asked, what kind of support they could give us. And obviously, they had to read the script and vet it. And so we had a man named Major Patterson, who's no longer with the Marine Corps, but he was our liaison at the time. And he read the script, and Josh was talking about, surfing as a therapy, and he's very involved with taking wounded vets surfing, and he immediately connected with the script. He called us up and said, this is beautiful, this is really important story, how can we help? And at the time I had written this opening war scene that took place in Afghanistan, and I assumed we were going to shoot it in Montana. It's there's parts of Montana that are very deserty, so I just figured that's what we would end up doing, because I couldn't imagine going place that was actually a desert and shooting this. It just didn't seem possible on the budget of this film. But the Marine Corps came in and said they would support shooting that opening scene on Camp Pendleton in California, and they gave us the Humvees, the weapons. The Marines that are in that opening scene are real Marines. And so we used their immersion training base that looks like an Afghan village, and just an amazing support. And as you said, it merely makes this movie look a lot bigger than it is. And so through their support, they have to have the approval of the Department of Defense, which we also got. And and Josh can talk a little bit about shooting that opening scene there, as you were noting that oneer that opens up the movie.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. That's just one of those opening scenes that grabs you right out of the gate.
Yeah. Well, it has sort of serves two purposes. For one, there's a narrative purpose, and then there's a behind the scenes inside baseball making of the film purpose. The narrative purpose is that I'm a subjective filmmaker. I really like telling stories with a subjective point of view and really anchoring our audience's experience in whatever they're watching through the main character. And I'm not like an objective guy. Like, you'll see objective films and they sort of are shot however. They tend to be sort of more like, if two guys are sitting there, it's just like two shots and then an over the shoulder over the shoulder. It's not a super stylistic sort of thing. But I don't really make movies like that. And initially I was like, man, like, we've got an opportunity here to immediately connect the audience and put them through exactly what culture has gone through. Right. This not a thing where it's sort of a war scene shot like a typical war scene where you sort of go, okay, I'm seeing the cuts. I understand that, like, it's a movie, right? And it lets the audience off the hook. Those could still be super dynamic and engaging, but to a degree, it just every time you cut, you let the audience off the hook. And narratively, I just thought, let's as a whole with the movie, let's take the audience on the exact same journey that Coulter's going on. So from the very beginning, we are locked in with Coulter. We go through this really horrific war scene, which I'll come back to in a second. And then we immediately get out of that and we go to Montana. And if you watch closely, the first half of the movie, up until when Coulter goes fishing for the first time, it is almost entirely shot in close-ups, and we generally avoid drone shots or any big wide shots of Montana. Even when he's outside, we're tight close. We don't really see, because Coulter's not seeing that around him. He's not seeing the beauty of Montana yet. So even like the first time we see Coulter in Montana, you see Livingston, but it's shot through the van windows. You're inside the van. You're not in a nice drone shot panning off the van and seeing the beautiful town of Livingston, because that he doesn't see it that way. He's like, "Oh, I don't even know why I'm here." Right. And it's not until he goes fishing and he sees the Yellowstone for the first time that we widen out, right? We got that nice crane shot. We go to a drone, and so I wanted to mirror Coulter's journey and the way he's experiencing the movie, right? The story. I wanted that to be mirrored for the audience. So the audience doesn't get to see Montana as a whole, except for the one shot with Ike, but they really get to see Montana until Coulter gets to see Montana. And so coming back to the opening scene, um, narratively, I just thought, if we shoot this as a oneer, you're never letting the audience off the hook. You are not allowing the tension to go away because by cutting the shot, cutting to another angle. If you keep it as a oneer, you never give the audience a moment to like just blink, right? And also, it's just like that's what war is like. There's no cuts. There's no like, getting to see a close up of the guy with the RPG. Like you only see that quickly from a distance. You can barely see it. It's chaotic. And I just thought that would be a really great way to just throw, the audience into the experience of the chaos of war. And so narratively, it just felt like it really fit to do that. The sort of behind the scenes version of why I did that is really love oneers, but the other thing is it allows you to shoot a lot of stuff in a very limited amount of time. Because if you were to shoot that war scene typically, right, with a lot of different angles and all that stuff, not only do you have to set up all those individual angles, but you also have to repeat takes for all those individual angles, right? So that requires, and the other thing too is that the audience expects to see a lot of that scene, right? Like if you decide not to show an explosion, they're going to go, "Why didn't you show the explosion?" It's like, well, we didn't have the money to really do it. So we just, you know what I mean? But if you're in a oneer, the audience automatically, they recognize psychologically that you are in a oneer and you're not going to see everything. And so it gives you flexibility and freedom to show certain things or not show certain things. Like, we would have had to cover all those Marines firing those guns in a bunch of different angles, and we would have had to see all the bad guys getting shot up, right? And like that could have been really effective, but we just frankly did not have the time to do all that. And so by limiting itself to a oneer, you basically, yeah, you spend the first half of the day rehearsing, but then you get 3, 4 takes in. If you get it, you're done and you move on to the next thing. And so that has been an approach that's I've used in other films that's like really, really saved me time. But also it just creates a really, really dynamic and exciting shot and or scene. And it really also involves the crew because everybody knows you're doing a oneer and everybody's holding their breath, right? Like hoping that you get it, hoping that the camera operator doesn't make a mistake, hoping that everything goes off the way it should. And when you get it, everybody is excited and happy, and so it's a really great way of involving everybody and putting everybody on edge for a minute as you attempt to do it. And so it makes it allowed us to get that whole scene in the time that we had available to us. If we had had to do it the other way, it would have been out of our budget. It would have been out of our ability to capture that war scene in a way that really justified us being there.
Well, it worked. Well done. Congratulations on that one. So,
Thank you.
um, and what was it like filming in Montana? I used to work in television back in the day, and Montana was always one of the easier states to film in. Is it still that way?
Yeah, I found Montana to be incredibly supportive. The one challenge with Montana is like, they have a really great filming incentive, so they encourage people to come and you get money back. The challenge with that though is Montana, I think it's a fairly new system and Montana doesn't necessarily have the infrastructure to support. And you've run into this in other states. I had this experience in Oklahoma a couple years ago where they had a fantastic incentive, but they don't have really the crew and infrastructure to support a lot of different productions. You have kind of your A team, your B team, and that's it. And Montana is similar. Actually, funny enough, there's a lot of people from LA that work in LA that actually have houses and live up in Montana, and they just travel down to LA for work because it's a pretty easy shuttle. But that doesn't mean they necessarily want to work in Montana. So that is really the only challenge. You have to kind of bring in quite a number of people, depending on your production. Obviously, that eats up costs. So if you're a studio, Montana's like, great. And what's the difference? On a more independent film, you just have to be careful about how you sort of set up your production. That's sort of what we found. That said, the people we got and the level of support from the state was fantastic. And I mean, look, like you've got, it does so much for you. I just have to put Brian in front of the Absaroka Mountains and tell him to say his
Yeah.
line. I don't have to do anything else, Like, you just put them
Right.
on the Yellowstone. You don't like, it's so much production value because that's what it is. That's where, so really the ability to get the permits to shoot on the Yellowstone River, to shoot on the Gallatin, to shoot on Depew Spring Creek, like that does so much for you. And that's where we really got the okay and the support from the state of Montana. And even from the beginning, I'll let Steven tell you, but even from the beginning, the state, and especially the people in film there, um, were really supportive of the project, and actually gave Steve. Is it a grant? I'll let you tell it, Stephen.
Yeah, so like I said, I wrote the script many years ago, and it kind of got pushed around here. Tried to get it to some people, and I got it to a woman named Jerry Rafter, who's a producer here in Montana, actually in Missoula, out by you. And she read the script, and she told me to apply for the Big Sky Film Grant from the Montana Film Office. And I got the grant. I was one of two narrative films to get some money from the state that year. It wasn't a ton of money, but the validation that I got from that grant really pushed the production forward. And I don't think the film would have got made without that grant. Just um, the validation it gave me in the script when I started sending it around. So, and then throughout the whole process, the Montana Film Office, if we called and we said we needed, a crew, to the incentive that they gave us for filming here, their just support was, incredible. Allison Whitmer came to the set. She's the head of the film office, and made sure everything was going smoothly and asked what we could do. She helped with our scouting trip, so their support was just unbelievable.
Well, Stephen, it sounds like you were just on a roll, man. You got the grant, you got the Department of Defense on board, you got Simon Gosworth. Like people must have really been drawn to this script, right?
Well, I like to say that if you want to make an independent film, make it about veterans and fly fishing, because they are the two most passionate audiences you will ever find. People who, served in the military or support veterans will do anything for their organization or another veteran. And as you know, fly fishermen are just incredibly passionate. Our executive producer, Mark Kamora, he came on when it was just a script, and he'd never never worked on a film before, and I just found him through the American Museum of Fly Fishing, which he's a board member, and his passion for the film just won out, and he supported us throughout the whole thing. So yeah, I mean, definitely lucky to get the support that we have, but I think it was all due to people want to support veterans and their love of fly fishing.
And you had written for several magazines, right, over the years, the Drake and Fly Rod and Reel and Field and Stream. I'm sure many others that I'm not aware of. But was this one of your first screenplays, or?
It's the first one I ever wrote by myself. When I was living in New York and I was a magazine editor, I had a good friend named Brian Blatstein, who was an actor, was doing sort of the circuit on NYPD Blue and CSI and stuff. And he wanted a bigger role for himself and asked me if, I wanted to write something with him. And we started to sit down and we wrote a couple scripts together. And it was, one of the greatest experiences of my life, writing a story, making up a story with your best friend. And we were going to be, the next Matt and Ben or, Ed Burns, and kind of shoot it ourselves. But, and that was sort of the plan with this script. But, I quickly learned what I did not know was a lot. And, I'm indebted to Josh for life for coming on and, not only, shooting this thing and doing it, as you said, with such, it just looks amazing, but letting me be there every day. And I've learned so much from him about not only writing, but filmmaking and just being on a set. It's been an incredible journey.
What, were you and your buddy not handsome enough to be the next Ben?
Yeah, I definitely am not. He could have pulled it off. I think it more came down to finding that money, and we never wrote anything. I don't think that we were obviously going to make an independent movie, and you need to have something that people are super passionate about or a big star. And obviously, two guys hanging out in a bar writing aren't going to find the next get the script to Bruce Willis. But writing a script about fly fishing and veterans really made the difference. And as we said, the support just came out of the woodwork.
Yeah, you're not going to attract J-Lo with that
Yeah.
approach. But, well, that's excellent. So the film has been shown at some film festivals and stuff already, and will be released by a major studio later. Can you guys kind of speak to that?
Yeah, we were able to premiere the film at the Woodstock International Film Festival, which is really exciting, and felt right for the film. The Woodstock Catskills area is the birthplace of American fly fishing. It's near where I live. I live up in the Hudson Valley of New York, and it felt like the right place to kind of premiere it. And that was really wonderful. And then we soon after that we screened it at the San Diego International Film Festival, which also felt right because of the large veteran community and active duty military community, out in San Diego. And they presented us with an award, the Valor Award, for movies that sort of portray military service and veterans. And that was obviously very exciting. And then after that, we started chopping the film. For those that don't know, there are some movies that get made with like Universal Studios or Warner Brothers, and those are sort of made from the beginning. But independent films often are independently financed by investors, and then you got to go find a buyer who's going to either put it on a streamer or put it on iTunes or put it in the theaters. And so we were really fortunate to find Blue Fox Entertainment and Sony Pictures came on board as a package. And basically, Sony took the worldwide rights to the film, the digital rights to the film, and will be releasing it digitally, like iTunes, Amazon, all that stuff where you can rent it, both in the U.S. and the world. But before that happens, Blue Fox Entertainment is going to be releasing it theatrically on June 9th. And so it'll be in theaters across the country. You'll be able to We'll provide a link that people can click on in the show notes to like where they can go find tickets, and there'll be more info about that. But we're really, really excited because just, look, as a filmmaker, the challenge of getting a movie to screen in theaters these days is so difficult. The movies that are screening in theaters are big major studio blockbusters. They're the big superhero movies, big action movies. Small independents are struggling right now. But I think that to see the level of support from both Sony and Blue Fox for putting this movie in the theater speaks volumes about how they think this film is going to be received by the public. And I think that you know the ability to go see this film in a theater, right? It's just such a different experience. Like, still, as much as streamers and everybody has their home systems and a 60-inch TV, 70-inch TV, to be in a theater just changes the dynamic of what you're experiencing. And so uh, to be able to go see that for your listeners or anybody who comes across this or happens to see the film, like, go see it in the theater. It'll just be a completely different experience. And that happens June 9th, and it'll be in theaters for a little bit, and then eventually it'll be out on digital and streamers.
Wow, that's so cool. So Stephen, were you at the premiere? I imagine.
Yeah, I got to see it in Woodstock, where I grew up in New England, so I had a lot of family there. One of the guys who taught me how to fish on the Salt was there, and that meant a lot to me. And then able to go out to San Diego, and our Marine liaison was there, and a lot of the Marine people who worked on the film and helped us came out and supported it, and it was just yeah, both of them are amazing events. And as Josh said, like seeing the big sky on the big screen, it just makes all the difference. So
Oh man, I just put it on my calendar, June 9th. Hopefully it's around one of the theaters around here. We'll find it one way or another. Is there a specific site or something that folks can go to learn more about this and where these releases will be?
The easiest way to find info later on is, yeah, bluefoxentertainment.com/films /mending the line, with dashes between mending and line. But we'll be sure to send this to you so you can put it in the show notes. Obviously, if you Google Mending the Line, Google Blue Fox Entertainment Mending the Line, that page will show up.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, congratulations, you guys. Stephen, it must have been so rewarding to write the script 10 years ago and then see it on the big screen at the premiere. And you guys also won some awards already, right?
as Yeah, as Josh mentioned, we won the Valor Award at the San Diego Film Festival, which was very meaningful. It's for a film that portrays veterans in the military in a authentic and positive light, and they think the film can really make a difference. So that's really the biggest thing for us is to have this film make a difference. Like you said, if it gets one guy who's struggling to go out and fly fish or surf or just take a walk in the woods, that's great for us. That's what we're trying to do here. And obviously, the more people that see it, the more chance of that happening. So we definitely hope people come out and support it.
Well, excellent. Well, thanks again for joining me and telling me about this project. This is super cool. I'm super excited to see it and help spread the word.
We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Love talking about it.
Go to thefebruaryroom.com where you can access a complete library of our podcast and read more about our guests, their fishing stories, and favorite fly patterns. We're always looking for exceptional fly fishing yarns, and if you have one to spin, shoot us an email at info@thefebruaryroom.com. The February Room is always free, but if you feel like throwing a nickel in the pond, we appreciate any additional listener support. For companies and individuals interested in sponsorship opportunities, please contact us for our media kit. Thanks for stopping by the February Room, and we'll see you down here next week.